Clinton administrations. We're joined by Leon Panetta, who most recently served as President Obama's defense secretary, earlier as CIA director. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be with you, Wolf.
You told the New York Times just a few days ago, and I'm quoting now, you said, "I've never been so nervous in my lifetime about what may or may not happen in Washington." You've served in the government for almost, 50 years or so. After watching the president's news conference this afternoon, do you feel any differently?
Well, we are living in the world according to Trump, and that news conference was a remarkable display of this president. It's tough to gauge this president by a standard that has been used by past presidents. This is a president like no other president we've ever had, and he wanders between the real world and the world according to Trump. I guess my concern is that at some point, the President of the United States has to get very serious with the American people and with the press about the challenges we face and what this president is going to do to deal with those challenges. If he simply continues to engage in this kind of personal attack, counterattack to the press, this reality TV kind of presentation, what I worry about is that not enough time is going to be focused on the real crises and the real threats that this country faces.
You were brought in to serve at one point as a White House chief of staff after President Clinton and his administration faced some early struggles. What does President Trump need to do now to regain control over his administration to get your confidence?
I think it's really important to get somebody who understands how the White House is supposed to operate. Every person who was picked for his staff has no experience in government or in the White House. And the reality is that there is no one who has the background to try to understand the processes and procedures that ought to be in place in order to serve the President of the United States. So I just would feel a lot more comfortable if they brought somebody in, a Republican from past administrations, somebody who understands how the White House is supposed to work. Because unless there is discipline, unless there is a strict chain of command, unless there is a process put in place that provides thoughtful consideration of the options that should go to the president, you're going to have a hit-and-miss operation that could result, I think, in a serious crisis at some point.
When you say a serious crisis at some point, let me get back to that quote you had in the New York Times. "I've never been so nervous in my lifetime about what may or may not happen in Washington." If he doesn't accept your advice, tell us why you're as nervous as you are right now.
Well, let's just take as an example, if a major crisis develops with Iran, with Russia, in the Middle East, or with North Korea, major crisis, they take some kind of very provocative action against the United States. What is the process in the White House to deal with that? My understanding is the National Security Council has yet to meet. We don't even have a national security advisor. Who is going to take responsibility for that crisis, provide the president with thoughtful consideration from the Secretary of State, from the Secretary of Defense, the recommendations that are important to present to the president so that the president can make a decision about how to handle that crisis? That's what concerns me, is that if we had a crisis at the present time, I don't see the mechanisms within the White House to deal with that kind of crisis, and that concerns me.
President Trump, as you know, made a trip to the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, that you used to head on his first full day in office in an attempt to smooth things over with the intelligence community. But since then, he's renewed his attacks on intelligence agencies, accusing them of conspiring to leak classified information, in his words, just like Russia. Earlier, he compared the intelligence community to Nazi Germany. You served as director of the CIA under President Obama. Is his relationship with the intelligence community beyond repair?
For the sake of the country, I hope that is not the case, because the president's first duty is to protect our country. And he cannot protect our country without good intelligence about what our adversaries are up to. You have to rely on information about what our adversaries are up to, what threats exist. And so I don't disagree that right now I think that relationship between the president and our intelligence agencies is not good. There's a lot of distrust. And ultimately, that has to be repaired, either by the people who are there, Mike Pompeo, Dan Coates, who's going to become the new DNI. I hope that General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, plays a role as well. My hope is that good people come in and reestablish the trust that is so important to the President of the United States if he's going to be able to protect this country.
Mr. Secretary, stand by. There's more information we're getting right now here in our Situation Room. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. And he says he fired Flynn because he misled the vice president, but otherwise he doesn't believe Flynn did anything wrong. We're back with the former Defense Secretary, former CIA Director Leon Panetta. Mr. Secretary, the president at that news conference, he said he had no problem with Flynn's talking about sanctions with the Russian ambassador before Mr. Trump took office. In fact, he said, I would have directed him to do it if I thought he wasn't. Did the president just endorse highly inappropriate, possibly illegal behavior by one of his subordinates?
That's a statement by the president that hopefully the White House will correct, because very frankly, although a national security advisor who is serving a new president, and he was not in that position, but obviously had been designated as such, has the right to talk to ambassadors and to make contact with others. But to talk about steps on sanctions that would undermine the policy of the existing administration at the time comes very close to the line of violating the Logan Act. And so for that reason, I think the president, as they say in Washington, hopefully misspoke.
General Flynn's security clearances have now been suspended while the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which he once ran, conducts a review of his behavior. How unusual is it for former head of the DIA, a former national security advisor, a former three-star general, to have his security clearances suspended?
Well, that is the step that you would take, when this kind of occurrence takes place within the White House. I mean, the issue becomes whether or not he obviously lied to the vice president about the discussions with the Russians. And the fact that he did and he was fired, I think, should result in him losing his clearances.
At his news conference today, the president was also presented with a list of challenges that his administration faces regarding the relationship with Russia. Watch this exchange and listen.
Mr. President, you mentioned Russia. Let's talk about some serious issues that have come up in the last week that you have had to deal with as President of the United States.
Okay.
You mentioned the vessel, the spy vessel off the coast of the United States.
Not good.
There was a ballistic missile test that many interpret as
Not
a violation
good.
of an
Not
agreement
good.
between the two countries, and a Russian plane buzzed a U.S. destroyer.
Not good.
I listened to you
During the
campaign.
Excuse me. When did it happen? It happened when, if you were Putin right now, you would say, hey, we're back to the old games with the United States. There's no way Trump can ever do a deal with us.
He went on to blame recent Russian provocations on the negative public perception of Russia, which he says is created by the news media. I'd like you to react to the president's position.
I think the president really does need to understand that Russia is an adversary, and Russia will do everything it can to to undermine the United States of America. That's where they come from. I don't question his effort to try to establish a relationship with Russia. But you cannot establish a relationship with Putin or with Russia from weakness. You have to do it from strength, which means that the President of the United States, when these provocative acts take place, has got to send a very clear message to the Russians that this is unacceptable and not try to make excuses for what the Russians are doing.
Does Putin have the upper hand right now?
I think Putin has felt for a while that he has had the upper hand here and is able to kind of do whatever he wants to do, whether it's in the Ukraine, whether it's taking military force to Syria, taking the provocative steps that he's taken with regards to missile deployments, etc. I think he feels that he has the opportunity to do that, and nobody is going to stop him. And that's why it's important for the President of the United States to draw those lines and to work with NATO, our key alliance in dealing with Russia, to make clear that there are lines that cannot be crossed by the Russians.
Leon Panetta, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Wolf.
Just ahead, I'll ask columnist and author Thomas Friedman about the world according to President